Collateral Damage is a rare Arnold Schwarzenegger movie that sort of came and went with very little buzz. It would be a return to #1 at the box office for Arnold Schwarzenegger, but ultimately this movie would be considered a flop, the third in a row in fact for Arnold, who was just 1 year away from making his run as the Governor. However, despite Collateral Damage's issues, I think that it's more fun than flawed, so let's get into it.
The difference is just gonna kill you.
Hey, what's up out there, everybody? This is Movies Never Say Die. I'm Anthony DeJoya. Today's movie is 2002's Collateral Damage, a movie I will admit is nothing more than a well-polished, average Schwarzenegger movie where he gets to do essentially what he does best. He kicks a little bit of ass, he delivers some tough guy lines, he does a lot of scowling, and to no surprise, he finishes as the hero. Here, Arnold plays Fireman Captain Gordy Brewer, a good, upstanding man of his community who loses his wife and young son in a terrorist attack on the Colombian consulate building in Los Angeles. Justice for his family, of course, gets lost in the politics, so good old Gordy will take on the mission of tracking down this terrorist called El Lobo who claimed responsibility, which makes Collateral Damage basically a road trip revenge flick with Arnold driving. So I mean, there is a modest charm here for 80s and 90s action movie geeks and of course for Arnold Schwarzenegger fans, but that's also sort of the problem with this movie. This movie is way too 80s in structure for being released in 2002. I mean, of course, during the 80s in the action genre and even into halfway through the 90s, you could possibly get away with the notion of a common fireman in LA being able to navigate his way into Colombia to infiltrate an army of violent guerrilla fighters. But here, with the level of convenience woven into Arnold's mission for justice, one could think that the writers had essentially no idea that we were in a new century and in a new era where film plots, even action movies with Arnold Schwarzenegger, needed to be a bit more believable, especially for a movie like this that takes itself way too seriously. However, and this is a big however, if you can suspend that disbelief and just have fun with the ride, Collateral Damage can entertain. As I mentioned, this movie opened #1 at the box office with a strong $15.2 million haul, but by week 2, Collateral Damage would take a 44% drop to the 5th spot with just $8.4 million, and when all was said and done, this movie would pull in $78.3 million at the global box office on an $85 million budget. So it really wasn't the numbers that you wanted to see, especially after Arnold's last two movies, The Sixth Day and End of Days, were also considered flop. There were delays and changes to this movie. I don't think these changes would have necessarily solidified the plot progression at all, but I do think that the societal impact of 9/11 on this movie was certainly a factor in its box office earnings. This movie was originally slated for an October 2001 release. Once 9/11 happened, it was put on pause and released in February of 2002, so it was just 5 months later, and I still think there was a large portion of the population who weren't either ready or interested in seeing a movie involving terrorist bombings on civilian targets, which in turn most certainly took a chunk out of the potential revenue that Collateral Damage could have pulled in. Now, as for changes, it's been reported there was a scene with Sofia Vergara where she was to play an airline hijacker, but that certainly hit way too close to home and it was removed from the film. It was also said that scenes considered unpatriotic were also removed, but from what I see, I don't think there was a noticeable effect on the final cut we were given because, as contrived as it all is, there is a smooth, textbook action movie progression to this movie. I think Collateral Damage is an easily accessible action thriller that thrives on surface level emotions, routine plot beats, one-note characters, and blatant plot holes, so it is mindless entertainment that I think can lure you in. This movie does play to Arnold's strengths, and where the script fails, I do think the supporting cast is able to come in and amplify a normally routine collection of side characters. The always emotive Elias Koteas is solid as a patriotic but sleazy CIA agent. John Leguizamo brings some comical energy to his small part as a drug chef. I think John Turturro is fun as a blatantly slimy hustler and pivotal plot device for Arnold's mission, and I also think Francesca Neri adds an emotional element to contrast all the tough guy bravado more than effectively. And I love Cliff Curtis, and I think he's okay as El Lobo. He's menacing enough as a villain despite not really bringing anything new to this crime lord character type. I mean, he does try his best to be sinister. He does have a gnarly scene with a snake and a soldier being reprimanded, but I don't think he ever really feels like a true match for Arnold as much as all of his army of henchmen does. But I mean, there are plenty of doses of action and suspense and close calls mixed in with all the conveniences to have fun with, despite Arnold never really firing a gun, which is a fun fact. Andrew Davis directed this movie, and with his experience in the action genre, I think he is able to elevate this by-the-numbers revenge mission. Davis directed films like Under Siege and The Fugitive and Above the Law, so where Collateral Damage has its flaws, mainly with its formulaic and unrealistic progression, visually it is a well-polished action thriller with a lot of adult themes that kids can just so happen to follow as well. Here's my hot take. I personally think this movie should have been developed as a sequel to 1985's Commando, with Arnold bringing back John Matrix. I think they could have aged up his wife and kid just a little bit, and it would have accounted for some of the silliness in the story beats here, because as it is, Collateral Damage seems to lack a lot of self-awareness to how contrived it really is. And in the end, this isn't one of Arnold's better movies, but it's really not one of his failures either. This would be one of his last movies on the back end of his prime as an action star before taking an 8-year venture into politics. To me, this movie feels like a big budget production of an 80s action movie, and I think that when you look at it from that perspective, some allowances can be made that make this a decent watch. So I'm going to give Collateral Damage a solid C+. And that's it for today, guys. These have been my thoughts on 2002's Collateral Damage, a decent movie. Let me know down in the comments what you think of this one, if you've seen it. What are some of your favorite Arnold Schwarzenegger movies? What are some of your least favorite Schwarzenegger movies? Let me know your thoughts. Thank you guys so much for watching. I truly do appreciate it. And until the next review, movies never say die.
This is Jack Burton in the Pork Chop Express, and I'm talking to whoever's listening out there.
Flag of war. You gotta become war.
I suppose we have to register you as a lethal weapon.
You trying to say Jesus Christ can't hit a curveball?